If we ask, when does an embryo or fetus acquire moral status, the right to moral regard, there are many possible answers, and your comments did not disappoint. Welcome to Abortion Ethics 101. Class is in session again. Let's look at some of these candidate answers. So in this debate, in this really divisive debate around the status of embryos and fetuses, a first look shows the answers to range all over the map. There are people who believe that there should be full-on protections from the time of conception. Interestingly, as someone noted, not from the beginning of pregnancy before conception has happened, although some legal texts do refer to that as a significant moment. Nobody is actually defending moral regard for gametes, for the egg and sperm. The earliest people will defend is the moment of conception, when the two nuclei fuse and a new genome emerges. And then the candidate answers go all the way to birth, going through things like the formation of the neural tract, appearance of a heartbeat, the time when a fetus is recognizably human with a shape and organogenesis that has made it recognizably human, perception, sentience, as this comment says, the ability to feel pain, viability, the ability to survive outside of another person's body. And there are a few things that we have to understand in order to understand why this discussion is so hard. The first one is that once we have theoretically established when moral regard should start, it does not follow that abortion should be illegal from that point onwards. It just means you will now have two entities with moral regard, the fetus and the pregnant person, who both merit moral regard, whereas before that time, you have only one, the pregnant person, and the embryo or fetus, before the time when it acquires moral regard, well, has not acquired moral regard. But from none of this does it follow that the embryo or fetus should see its rights be the most important ones in the room every single time, right? So that's a separate question. We'll get there in a future lesson. We're just looking at when does it get on the moral radar. Another important thing to understand is that if you look at all these candidate answers, you can, and you sort of go to the right distance and squint a little, you can understand why we have such a hard time agreeing. Because all of these candidate answers are observable phenomena. They're observable things. We can hear a heartbeat. We can see a human shape. We can observe viability. We can observe birth. And what we are looking for, what we've established when we've defined the question in the last lesson, what we're looking for is not something that's likely to be observable under a microscope, because we're looking for the emergence of moral rights. Moral rights are a whole other category of things than our biological features. And it would be very surprising if we found a biological feature that was the same as the emergence of a moral right. Another characteristic that all these candidate answers share, it's that they are instants. It's a little bit baked into the way the question is asked, but we do keep asking the question like that. We're looking for a moment before which there are no rights and after which there are rights. Some people go further and will say we're looking for the moment from which an embryo or fetus becomes a person. So it's like it is nothing before and then it's a full-fledged person. Here we're looking for a light switch, like on, off, or rather off, on. And when we look for light switches, the universe tends to not cooperate. Nature, the world, is full of dimmer switches. It's full of stuff that happens progressively, that switches on very slowly. And there is a candidate answer that reflects that, which we have not mentioned yet and which I did not see in the comments, the so-called gradualist answer to the question of the status of embryos and fetuses. The idea that an embryo or a fetus will acquire moral rights gradually as it develops. And as it turns out, this is the position that was adopted in Swiss law. I'm not saying it's the right one. It's just one more candidate answer. But as we shall see in future lessons, countries do have to make decisions about what to put in their laws one way or another. So here's the summary for this lesson. There are many candidate answers to the question of from when does an embryo or a fetus acquire moral rights. Most of these candidate answers are instant, they're light switches, and they're observable biological things. And this makes it really, really hard to agree because it's unlikely that it's going to be a light switch, and biological things are different from the moral, legal, social, ontological stuff that makes up the emergence of moral rights. Now, homework for next time is going to be inspired by one of your comments. Someone said, shall we touch upon the situation where there is a lethal accident involving a person who's pregnant and the fetus dies? How should law regard such a situation? Tell us what you think, or tell us how your country deals with this, or both. And we shall discuss this case in our next class. Yeah.